this is just one of those little, pieces of the case that aren't going to really matter too much. But in this way, it does. The fact that we're all here showing support for this. We have a 50,000 person amicus brief that's been signed in support of Richard and what he's doing. So it matters that we're here. So the fact that it is a nothing burger is really not the case. The case is it's important that we're here and we're doing what we're doing because the judge sees all this stuff as the case moves forward. So we're all here. It looks good. Excited to get in there and hook up with all the Hexkins. Keep up with the great conversations. I'll come back after the court case and give you guys an update if there is any updates. At least like in the numbers, the showing, what the lawyers say to us, because I'm supposed to have a meeting with the lawyers afterwards. So that'll be cool. Hopefully get some information. But keep it up, guys. We'll let you know when we get out of court.
Thanks, brother.
Try to keep everybody checked there.
Yeah, I'll try.
Just one clown. Make sure everybody stays professional.
Yeah, we'll try. Unless Cleo's here. I don't know. Talk to you guys. Have a good one.
Cool. We should be able to get. I'm surprised, like knowing how many people are going to show up, that they actually did push it as late into the day as they did. Part of that reason, so it could be like two-pronged. Like either they don't really mind the fact that a lot of people are going to be showing up. Usually judges don't want like a big like media thing and stuff. Like they just don't really like that. She could be different. Like she could be different. We'll see. We just got to know where this judge is at. Like we don't really know. So far it seems to have been fair, like reasonable. Let's just say. I mean, the whole thing is insane, but so from like the judge's perspective, like, it's been fair, right? Like nothing that shows, that she really like hates the guy or like is any way kind of biased against this case. So so far so good. Obviously it's subject to change. It'd be interesting.
That's all you could ask for, really.
It'd be
a judge, non-biased opinion.
I'm pretty sure we'd know about it if he was sitting in court because we got a bunch of Hexicans in there.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
I believe he's in the States. I think he's in the States. I think he's been in the States for a while. Like you could almost kind of tell there was like a change that happened on chain where most of the activity that was happening in like midnight hours, like 4 a.m. hours, and then it kind of so like more European time zones, and then it kind of really went on like American time zones. So there's a very kind of like abrupt change in that. I think he's been in the States for a while. He doesn't need to show up to this hearing. I mean, technically, he doesn't need to show up at all, but I think he is, very intent on kind of like being present and making sure he knows everything that's said and everything's on like lawyers to, just do what they're going to do, right? Like, I think he's very involved in the process to use the billions of dollars he received from community members to not invest in the product which he promoted, all caps, Pulsechain, but instead invest almost all of it in Ethereum, which is simply insulting.
This guy
and absolutely
90 IQ.
Yeah, and absolutely a misuse of the funds in which he received. I, for one, like so many others, had full expectations from him to not only do right by his community, but also, as promoted so many times by some of his followers, I, along with others, fully expected to profit from Pulsechain investment. I hope the courts simply asks one thing. Why would people invest billions of dollars in a financial instrument if they are not expecting to profit from it? So may did through like liquid loans, other protocols, another protocol which took in millions of dollars in investment via a sacrifice for Pulsechain. I made an investment in Pulsechain. I was lied to and manipulated into doing it. I want my money back, and I want Richard Schuler and his influencers held fully accountable. Many thanks, Cleo, United Kingdom. I was like, this is the mental gymnastics that we're dealing with here. Like, my God, Pulsechain community. Like, I mean, point for point. Don't have any expectations. I don't work for you. No expectations. I had full expectations. Not only did I listen to Richard, I listened to a bunch of these other jagoffs that asked for even more money after I already, like, dude, what are you doing? Like, maybe turn off the computer. Like, I mean, have you thought of that?
Like, he didn't give me money, so I'm gonna sue him. That's literally what he wrote.
Who said this? There's this character around Yeah, Cleo. I mean, but this guy is a clown. Like, unfortunately, that's what I've been telling you guys is like the SEC is going to like they got these complaints and they have people. I mean, Cleo's a retard, but they have people who are not as retarded who maybe are salty that Richard had even if they're salty at him for being successful. There's a ton of people like this that that Richard Hart came up with, even in Florida, people that know him personally, people he kind of like, grew up with, and they're salty. Like they're salty. And so they're gonna like the SEC is gonna parade these people into court and they're gonna all tell them that like, oh yeah, well, like Richard has done like all this other like they're just gonna cast doubt onto his character because that's all they have. All they can do is just try to make Richard look like a bad guy. That's all they got. But they're going to do it, so I mean that's about as much of a case as I think they have. I don't know if anybody else feels otherwise.
So this person has no money in Hex though, whoever that Cleo bitch is.
I mean, it seems like he probably sacrificed some money. It seems, look, people get excited after Hex did what it did, and you got to remember, Hex had 4 good months. That's all it was. Like Hex had 4 really outstanding months, and in the middle of like towards the end of that, Richard put up this the sacrifice, and people got so excited that they sacrificed a lot more than like they misunderstood. They thought it was like a wink and a nod, like Richard basically said, yeah, like I proved to you guys that my Hex thing did amazing, and now this next thing is going to be even more amazing. But he never really said that, but that's what it was like taken as. And so people took their profits, they thought they were up a lot of money, and they piled it into Pulsechain. And because there was such a big lag in between when Pulsechain was commenced and when it actually came out, right?
A lot of people are up, like, because they like wouldn't have sold and they'd be down.
Killed a lot of people too.
Well, here was the problem. The problem was this, and I don't blame Richard for this. I'm just saying like the reality is because there was such a gap in time, it caused people to keep coming back and like asking about Pulsechain. So you had a lot of these like opportunistic people who came out and started just taking money for projects. I mean, this happens everywhere. But it was because there was no sort of like people didn't know what to expect. When was this going to happen? And so they figured like, okay, anybody who's like trying to support Pulsechain or build on it, like these must all be good things, right? And so they put even more money into these other projects before they were announced, before they were completed, before Pulsechain even existed. And that I think is what broke the camel's back. Like if people were already sort of unhappy that they had to wait so long for Pulsechain, at least you were kind of, you were kind of betting on Richard. But to like take all these side bets on like liquid loans and KDP and all these other like that was stupid. I mean, but it added insult to injury, and this is the kind of stuff that happens when you don't have like a clear like leadership position. Like I really think Richard should have come out and just said flat out, like, do not do this. Like flat out, like do not do this. Like
through
wait.
everything and like
Do not do
Yeah,
what?
but exactly.
Do not get into like other side coins, because if you're referring
Well,
to that, he did say that multiple
he
times.
definitely said like that. Yeah, he said there will
Yeah,
be scammers on Pulsechain, and there will be a lot
Yeah,
of them.
he said the only ticker he supports is his own. So
well,
I don't know if
then
it
you
was
have no
you
excuse.
or other people, but other people obviously either didn't want to take his advice, so their fault, or B didn't ever watch his videos and just
The other problem was the
did
original
their own
investors, they
research.
wanted a dump, right? They wanted their money, but they were locked up for fear that they were doing emergency stakes and whatnots to get out of it. So
Well, here's what I meant by that. I mean, I know Richard's position on it has always been like, don't go into all of this like side nonsense, right? Like the only tickers you really need on Pulsechain are these ones. I don't care if anything else even exists. I'm saying just like, like specifically to like look at a project team and be like, do not give these people any of your money. I mean, because here's the reality is like nothing was ever going to work on Pulsechain until Pulsechain launched. And that's why like, my position on it was, let them deliver first. Like let them deliver whatever it is they want to build. If Pulsechain is not out, their thing can't even exist. So why are you capitalizing them to the tune of like, I mean, okay, maybe Liquid Loans is not like a terrible project, even if you think it's a good thing. I mean, is it worth $50 million? No. I mean, it's not worth $5 million. You could have built that project for 500 grand. this is kind of this was the scam, right? Because nobody can value these promises to build in any good way whatsoever. I mean, listen, like you even look on Ethereum where all of these protocols have existed, and you have like the original project teams that know what they're doing. I mean, with the Liquid Loans project is actually like from an engineering standpoint, it is a good project. But look at it statistically. Even on Ethereum, people don't use it. They don't like it. It's one of the like the most under, like I mean, they just don't use it. So for that to get $50 million, the only reason it got that was because people figured like, oh, they're talking about Pulsechain. Like, yeah, but who cares, right? Like at the end of the day, what's it worth? Not 50 million. And yeah, people saw that, more people piled in, took even more money from the community. Now everybody's money is tied up, and so like other people like like, and then they get mad.
Yeah,
But like
that's
Richard
all.
didn't have
All the
anything to do
things
with
you're
that.
talking about is all their own fault.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like
of course.
I
That's what
but
I'm
he
saying.
I
acts like Richard Hart
sacrificed.
has something to do with it, like with
Yeah,
anything
like
besides bullshit.
No,
So it's just a bunch of
I'm not
sour
saying
ass
Richard
people,
Hart
pretty much, right? Like some people just really sour
I,
that they made a
I'm not
mistake.
I'm not saying Richard Hart had anything to do with it whatsoever. I'm just
No,
saying that
what I'm
because
saying
there
is
was
like Cleo
yeah.
kind of wrote it as like Richard Hart is involved with Liquid Loans. Like, dude, fuck off.
Right. So they're trying to blame him for people's mistakes, for not having risk management and shit like that.
He literally
and you know
put,
what?
like, why did you even write Liquid Loans on there if like you're fighting Richard Hart? You feel me? Like he just looks retarded. Just made himself look even stupider.
I mean, the problem is that this stuff gets presented to a judge, and so when the judge has to make a decision of like, is there anything of merit in this case to proceed? Because that's the only question we're asking. Like, if you guys want my perspective on it, is I think like, what's the outcome of today? I don't think the case gets dismissed. Like, I give you guys multiple reasons. One being that Do Kwon used the same arguments. Like, Do Kwon was not a U.S. citizen. They used all the same arguments. He had plenty of money for lawyers. I think Richard's team is better than whatever Do Kwon went in with, but the argument is about the same. And in Do Kwon's case, I don't think it was even taken for weight. Like they were just like, okay, yeah, fuck off with that. Like we have jurisdiction, okay, bud. And I think what the outcome of today is going to be, like, if anything positive comes out of it, it's going to be the fact that the judge is going to take some of like the most absurd charges on there, or like allegations rather, from like, because the SEC just like threw the kitchen sink at it, right? Like they're like, oh well, technically PulseX is a copy of Uniswap, and Uniswap has developers in Brooklyn, which makes it like America. And then I mean, the protocol has been forked thousands of times. I mean, it's the most ridiculous. So I think some of the most like preposterous allegations might not be heard like in the future. I think the judge might take some of them off. But I mean, overall, I think they're going to go forward with the case because, like, again, the only thing is to like paint, like they have to cast enough doubt that the judge thinks that, okay, maybe something did happen here, and we have to have a finding of facts. Like that's all the SEC really has to do to push it to the next step. Like Richard's lawyers have like a kind of like a monumental task of saying that the argument on jurisdiction is really this. It's not like if they don't have jurisdiction, there's no case. To dismiss it on jurisdiction, what they would have to prove is that there is a venue other than that court or the United States that is better or more suited or more appropriate to hear this case, right? So it's not like it gets dismissed on jurisdiction and then evaporates. It's like they would have to say that there is a different venue for which this case is more appropriate. And when you're talking about U.S. securities violations, like there is no other venue on earth that is more appropriate than a venue in the United States. So unfortunately, like if they come up with something new, I mean, it would be amazing. Like this would help a lot of people. But the court that they're in, the reason that listen, the SEC always goes to this one court, always. Why? Because this court gives them what they want, right? So that's why I'm sort of like, I don't know if they're going to be able to get this part of it done, but maybe they'll be able to get some of it thrown out, which I think would be great.
There will at least be a little progress.
I'd have to agree with what he said. I don't think it's getting dismissed either. And I don't think it's gonna have. I mean, I'm seeing some trolls on X right now, like talking about how like if this doesn't get dismissed, it's Pulsechain's over. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think anything that happens today is gonna bring down Pulsechain or Hex or anything like that. That's crazy. I think Pulse is completely undervalued right now, but I definitely don't think it's getting dismissed today.
Well,
Here, go
do
ahead.
we want it to get dismissed though? Is
Of
dismissal
course
the
we do.
best outcome, or do we want it to resolve in a manner where precedents become set that if you conduct yourself in a non-scammy way, you can actually do crypto? And I mean, if it goes the course, I think it could have a bigger positive outcome than if the judge just threw it out based on some jurisdictional violation or inadequacy.
That's actually a good
Here's
argument.
what
So you're saying,
here's what I could tell you.
go ahead.
Go ahead, bro. Go ahead, man.
Well, I like his
You
argument
go
about
first.
if it
I'll
goes to
go after.
course, because more eyes will be on it then, and then you have a lot more people. And I like what
All publicity.
what Ivan on Tech said about this, setting the precedent for the entire industry. So that's actually interesting.
Guys, here's what you got to understand about precedent. Like, yeah, that would be the most exciting sort of part of this, right? So like go through all of this hardship and pay all these lawyers, but you get some precedent set and you dramatically change how these courts operate. Now, here's the problem with that is that almost none of the rulings from XRP, anything, I mean, just like think of all the biggest crypto cases, none of them are being taken in as precedent. Why? Because the judicial system is highly corrupt. They're purposely trying to wade around any issues that would truly set precedent into the future. They're doing this on
Too much money
purpose.
and power
So
against crypto, basically.
the probability of having a true precedent set by this case is extremely low and extremely expensive. Like if this was something to go to that extent, like really rewrite how these things get prosecuted, you're looking at years for something like that to happen. You're talking about, instead of, I think Richard's probably out maybe like 2 million or so on legal expenses. You're talking like 10-15 million on legal expenses to get something like that accomplished. It is far cheaper to go and like lobby politicians and get them to adopt a better policy and all of that stuff than to try to change the game through legal precedent. Now, it's just how it's been. I mean, there could be an exception here. His lawyers could be that good. They could find something like that marvelous. But I'll tell you, like, there have been some very smart lawyers that have groomed through this. Like, there's probably been like $1 billion in legal fees paid into all of the crypto cases, and really no one has come up with anything. So I hope it's different here. But if it's precedent setting, we're talking years, 2-3 years out.
The process is definitely not quick. The legal process is slow, grueling, and often unfair.
I'll be
That's
surprised if we
unfortunate.
see any like sort of little bit of resolution by the next year.
That's why they're going to wait until after the elections, right? Because Gensler's out if Trump wins, and if
Trump
that witch wins, he's still in the House and he plays for the
Same thing
House.
with Ellen, right?
Gary's gonna get
Doesn't Ellen have competition, right? Because she's anti-crypto, I imagine.
It's true that Gary Gensler is definitely on borrowed time, but as much as Trump is going to come in and hopefully clean house, like the Securities and Exchange Commission is not going to be the first thing to go. I listen, the SEC is on their last stand. I think that if this case was brought any later, like let's say they brought it like a year later, like maybe they would not have pursued this case as vigorously. Like it's a shit case. There's far better things for them to be spending resources and time doing. There are truly a lot of like terrible things that happen around crypto. There's also a lot of terrible things that happen around corporate fraud, which is honestly, guys, corporate fraud is the main thing that the SEC is charged with investigating. That is the main
Watch
thing.
him sue Donald Trump for world liberty before the election.
I mean, they're but they sue everyone. I mean, like look how many times Elon's gotten sued. I mean, they're still going after him. Like,
Well, I'm just surprised
but
they
the
haven't
problem is
like gone after World Liberty Financial already, just because the election's around the corner.
I mean, they don't like if you ask even like an honest retired SEC lawyer or someone who's been in like like a general general counsel at any big like hedge fund or like financial institution, and you really ask them like, has the SEC ever like set a wrong right? Like, have they actually done anything that would like help the people? And the answer is always going to be no. Like that's not just
Only
not
gonna
what
hurt
they
people
do.
for real.
Yeah, they do. They are not there to protect you, to help you,
To
like
restrict you
any of
and
this stuff.
prevent you from growing
Well, they're
wealth.
supposed to be there to help, but you know, that's not the case.
But they've never done it. That's the problem. You know, like if that is somehow part of their charter, I mean, this is the point where if we had better, you know, politicians or better people in leadership, like they would have, they would understand that as an entity, it needs vast reform. I mean, just to go based off of laws that were written in 1933 to try to like litigate cases and technology and all of this stuff in 2024. I mean, this is almost 100-year-old shit that they're using and constructs, 100-year-old constructs that they're using to litigate and really persecute you know, crypto as an industry. You know, it's not like they're targeting the bad actors. They're just saying like as a whole this thing can't exist and there's no real like legal pathway to do this in the United States. And not only is it just the United States, as if you ever even had business with the United States. So you could be abroad, but if you've ever taken investment, like now their nose is in it, right? I mean, it's just they've just gone way too far. And I think Gary is on his way out. This is their last sort of like hurrah, and that's why you see what you're seeing is like, guys, technically like as many positive things that have come out of like crypto litigation the past year, as of late, like the SEC has been winning. Like they've gotten better. You know, people think, oh, the SEC is losing all these cases. They're actually not. Like they're actually kind of on a roll right now. And one of the big things that came out is, you know, an important thing to know is that I think what was the exact, it was like crypto asset security or something like that. But there was some kind of like phrasing that they used, or crypto asset security. I think that's what it is. I'll double check it. But this is like the term. Do you know what it is? Does anybody
I
know what
think
it
what
actually
you
is?
said
Is it
last was
crypto asset
crypto
security?
asset security is what they used.
No, because remember they had to come out and say that like there was a case where the judge asked like, well, what is a crypto asset security? And because they couldn't define it, they had to roll it back and say like, yeah, we just kind of made
Yeah,
that
that was
up and we're not going to use that
the
term
XRP
anymore.
thing, right?
I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, it affected pretty much like every crypto case because they use that phrasing everywhere. I mean, in Richard's case, it's in there
Yeah,
like
that was
20
like the
times.
ETH. That was during the ETH part, I think.
It was recent. It was recent. I mean, maybe like 3 months ago, 2 months ago. I'll look it up real quick. But here's the problem. So you look at that and you say, well, they're kind of going back on what they said. Like they have to pull out this phrasing. They had to admit that they just made it up and that it doesn't
They
actually
just went
mean
on
anything.
spam spree, spamming cases. Like he's the real spam king, fucking Gary Gensler.
Well, yeah, but here's what I'm saying. It's like you look at that and you say, oh, well, that means like the SEC is down and out because they made a mistake. They had to admit this stuff. But the reality is like, no, the reason, so what they're swapping that out for, instead of fighting it as like, oh, everything is a crypto asset security, which means nothing. Like it just like, you know, the phrase doesn't mean anything. It has no meaning. What they're now actually going after is the secondary market because like, so we talked about like what's going to happen with Pulsechain. Nothing is going to happen with Pulsechain. There's no contention that Pulsechain is doing anything wrong or it has any, you know, everything that's on the secondary market is not an issue at all. So the way Pulsechain has been, the way it'll continue, there's nothing even in question. What the question really surrounds is that initial coin offering, right? So like Genesis, that is what's at issue
We did
here.
even
Right.
better than fucking Ethereum's little ice. Like Richard was really careful with the whole thing. Okay, so like
Well,
we're like a
he
better
copied.
fork of the ETH case, honestly.
That's what I've been. Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, so he copied everything Ethereum Foundation did. Like, he copied
And
them.
did
Like,
wrong.
so
Yeah.
he basically said that if whatever they did it was legal, then whatever I'm doing must be legal as well, right? I mean, he actually even just copied Ethereum. Like, that's how sure he tried. He
And then he called
tried
it
to
a
tie
snapshot
himself.
too. Like he made sure it was even better than their launch.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot of sketchy stuff that happened around the Ethereum ICO. I mean, people are really only starting to delve into it right now. And there is no actual foundation like that. Like you're saying, like he did it better. I think what you mean by that, or maybe one of the things you might mean by that, is that there is no pulse chain foundation, right? There's no actual organization or at least like a legal entity that is there to promote or enhance the value of pulse chain, which would constitute more of a security. And even then, guys, like if you dig into what is a security, which is the real question we should be asking, but there's not even a foundation. So so I've been telling people since the beginning, and the Ethereum bros are not like, they didn't pick up on it, but essentially if they're able to take Richard down for this, and I don't think they will be, but essentially that would give them a case example, not precedent, but it would give them an opinion to be able to go after Ethereum, because essentially Pulsechain and Ethereum are the same thing. So, they're kind of using it as a backdoor. You saw what happened when they went after consensus. It got shut down right away. I mean, like they didn't even get consensus into a hearing, and to be honest, with Joe Lubin, Vitalik, all the other actors behind the Ethereum, there is a lot of shady, very questionable things that happen there. A lot. Like they started calling it ETHgate, but because it's consensus, one of the biggest companies, like, I mean, they have it's incredible how much money is in that ecosystem. You have Vitalik kind of like in bed with the WEF. He's kind of like trying to play ball. I think that all helped them kind of like slip out of having the case then. I think they're going to continue to pursue them, but consensus technically is the only one so far that has been served by the SEC and has like had it totally ameliorated. They're the only ones. So I think that does bode well, but there's a lot of very shady, questionable stuff that happened around Ethereum as well. I mean, not as well. I mean, especially around Ethereum. So
Yeah.
see where it goes.
If anything, Pulsechain did a much better. It's much safer.
I'm just waiting for Vitalik to show up in the space and be like, "Who the fuck disrespected me?"
No, listen, I like Vitalik. I read all his papers. I read all his books. I think he's really brilliant. I think honestly, everything that has happened on Ethereum and like crypto in terms of like smart contracts and that side of crypto has all been envisioned by Vitalik. I mean, if you read his
100%.
books,
Yeah.
I mean, if he didn't do what he did early on, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right
Yeah,
now.
that dude's a genius. For
The
sure.
DeFi,
yeah,
the Master Chef contract alone, I don't know how involved he was with that, probably none at all, but it wouldn't have been even built if it wasn't for the Ethereum, the EVM system itself. And the Master Chef contract is the backbone of all of DeFi. It's the most forked contract in DeFi. So it's like, without those two things, we don't have this awesome ecosystem that we all love.
And Bitcoin would only be on centralized exchanges.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'd be getting dumped on by the government.
Yeah.
well, if you go back and you read his papers, a good one to read is Proof of Stake. That's Vitalik's book, but there's another good book called The Infinite Machine or The Infinity Machine, something like that. And you basically realize that everything that, I mean, even from his first paper, like in Bitcoin Magazine, like he laid out a roadmap for how this technology was going to go. And all that's really happened so far is that you've had people either working with the Ethereum Foundation, funded by the Ethereum or in some proximity to Vitalik. They've taken pieces of what Vitalik proposed and they've actually made them, right? Like Casper, like it's all his ideas. And these are ideas that he had like years and years and years ago, right? Like we still technically where we're at with Ethereum, with everything that has like been built and exists, are all ideas that Vitalik had like at least 5 to 8, maybe even 10 years ago, right? We're not even at kind of like the bleeding edge. So yeah, I mean, Vitalik, you can't deny that Vitalik has had, I mean, his vision for this is essentially what we all know of as like DeFi and crypto and all. I mean, the Master Chef contract, like regardless of who built it, like he's the guy who comes up with all of the like token, like all the standards for this stuff. Like that's super important. He's the guy who came up with the idea. I mean, EVM obviously. Yeah, I mean, regardless of how forked that contract is, the whole like engineering of like how Ethereum works, all a brainchild of Vitalik. And the funny thing is like a lot of people don't know this, but Vitalik comes up from like the hacker ranks. The people who started Ethereum were all hackers. I don't know if anybody actually knows that, but yeah, like I think Vitalik, you can't really. I think the reason they don't really fuck with Vitalik is because if he's gone, you're gonna have a ton of problems, like a ton of problems. You have cases where people propose like an EIP or like an improvement proposal, and they spend months on it, and Vitalik comes in and like rewrites it in half a day, and like that's the one that gets adopted. Like he's just on a completely different level, but he's not the one who actually wrote a lot of the code. Just so you guys know, like he was not the one who wrote the code. He's sort of like the visionary.
He also
For
sees like
tech.
exploits before other people do. I've noticed too. Like he understands it so well that he is thinking so far ahead that he knows that, well, if you do it like this, somebody could do this, and we need to do this to prevent that from happening. I think that's kind of also what you were talking about. He writes the standards.
That's the hacker mindset. You know, that's the hacker mindset.
Yeah, he
Like,
would never be able to do
honestly,
that if it wasn't for him constantly attacking and looking for attack surfaces.
yeah. And by the way, if you guys are interested in this stuff, the field of study around this is game theory, right? So that's really where a lot of these like constructs come from, and you know, kind of like that hacker mindset. And that's not to say it's been perfect. I mean, early on, right? Like the DAO hack, everybody knows the DAO hack, right? So it's not like it was perfect from the jump. Like there have definitely been some very big problems. But like from like a theoretical standpoint,
and game theory, it takes time and trial and error. It's just the thing.
Yeah.
Security
That's
is
why
always going to be trial and error at some point.
It's also why they say don't be the first in a technology and don't be the last. And we were all probably, a lot of us were in there early and we're the first. Well, we're no longer the first. We're right in the sweet spot. Actually, right now is the sweet spot when you're going to start to see exponential growth. You're going to start to see shit being built on the blockchain that you never even thought of. I tell people all the time, no coiners that have no idea what blockchain is, I tell them it's just as important as the internet. In the next 10 years, everybody will be using it. It's in all smartphones now. Like in the next 10 years, we're going to rely just as much on the blockchain or a version of a blockchain as we do the internet today. Huge potential for opportunity to build and grow because of that.
There's 170,000 ETH in there for whatever reason that he clipped in at like $3,800, you know, and what's the point of it, right? The argument that they could make is because that he went into ETH, unless he provides a different reason, whether that be for like security, right? Like reasons, like he didn't want to hold it into some stable coin because maybe something happens with the stable coin, so he just went to the native token. But the question is, like, why did you do that at 3,800 when you had it from when ETH was 1,200? Like, why would you do that? And but the argument that they're going to be able to make is say that we were trying to enhance the value of this sacrificed amount, and the question is why? Why would you do anything to try to enhance the value of this account if you're claiming that the account is for no purpose associated to Pulsechain or investors or anything at all? Why would you make moves to make money with this coin, right? And so that's how they're going to try to paint a construct that, oh yeah, well maybe he was trying to profit off of it, right? And I like, my opinion, you guys could hate this view, but I think he needs to scatter the sack into the wind, right? Throw it onto the chain. We'll go hungry hippo style. Whatever fucking happens. But the fact that he's just like keeping it dormant, doing absolutely nothing with it, it is bleeding out on ETH. You see what's going on with ETH. That paints a giant target on his back. And the worst part would be like the worst thing that have happened is for essentially a lot of that sack. I mean, any amount, but especially if it's a large fine, for essentially the SAC to be turned over to the SEC as a fine. Like that would be the worst like outcome of this ever. Like, can you imagine if the SAC, instead of going to capitalize Pulsechain, which is so incredibly like low liquidity, that instead of doing that, it just goes to the SEC? I mean, I think that would break a lot of people's sort of, will to continue to kind of like believe in either the ecosystem or whatever Richard is doing. And look, if he starts moving it out, I've laid out this plan a million times. I won't repeat it here, but even if he starts to capitalize Pulsechain off, like not even just buy Pulse, I'm just saying start moving the ETH that's already there to to Pulsechain at a certain rate, like let's just say 100 a day, 200, any amount. As soon as the SEC sees that balance start to go down, they're going to move as quickly as possible to try to settle with him. That's going to be that's I mean, I think the only reason all of this stuff is even happening is because of that money. That's it. I don't think they actually give a shit about what Richard did.
I mean, as somebody who understands smart contracts, there's so many things that could happen with that. I do agree, though. If it ends up in their hands, I don't think that's going to happen. Richard's too smart of a guy to let that happen. He could program a smart contract that literally gives it to the entire Pulse chain holders in some consensus way, and that would be better. Or you just buying. There's so many things he could do with it. I don't know what he's going to do with it. I'd be very shocked if it ends up in the government's hands, though. I don't see that happening. It would absolutely be detrimental to the entire system, though.
But that's what I'm saying. But I'm I assign everything a probability, right? Like especially around crypto. Like even if you really believe something is going to definitely happen, I would still allocate like a 1%, a 2% chance that it doesn't happen. So or vice versa. So when you talk about this, what is the probability that some amount is paid as a fine, and they allow him as a one-time thing to use the SAC, that coin to, he's never going to want to like validate the fact that he's controller of those funds. So he would rather pay the amount from other wallets, like other sources. But I think as like that's what they're going to try to convince him to do. They're going to try to have him transfer some amount to pay fine from that SAC wallet. I think Richard's too smart to ever transfer any funds from there. But I think that's what they're gonna go for. It's just like there's really no other way that this ends like well, right? Like he could just outright completely win the case. Like that could happen. But if that is to be the case, we're talking like more than a year of litigation. There will be a lot more hearings like this. It's going to be a long ass road, and at some point, like it's going to cost Richard more to keep fighting this. I mean, it depends on if they come up with like, we want $1 billion from you. Yeah, of course he's going to keep fighting it. Like he's not, he's not spending $1 billion on lawyers. But if they come out and they're like, we want 20 million, he'll just say, okay, here, right? Or I mean, even like 50 million, he'll probably just pay.
I mean, I see 20 million in USDC
paid him
come across Pulse Chain just 2 days ago.
Well, look, I mean, what Richard can really control is like where he can just move it around. Like he can just like allocate it to this coin, this protocol, that protocol, this chain, that chain. That's all he can really do with it. I think he understands that. Even if the case is over, right? And let's say he wins, he still can't like take that money and go buy a Ferrari with it. I mean, it's completely dead to him.
Why is that? I bought my Trackhawk with Bitcoin.
No, no. I'm saying like it's possible to buy cars with cryptocurrency. What I'm saying is like as to him personally, right? Like he can never use those funds to benefit himself personally. That's the point of that.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. And it wasn't like the dealership advertised that we accepted. It was just really it was a good timing, and I talked him into it. One of the guys there just happened to accept it, and he paid the price.
There are dealerships out there. I know there's a Ferrari in Miami. I think it's Miami, or it's somewhere around Miami, that will let you buy Ferraris and other cars in cryptocurrency. Like they have it on their website. It's like an official thing. It's done through banks. It's all like official, legit, authorized Ferrari dealerships. Lamborghini, I think one or two of them do that as well. So yeah, you can buy cars with crypto. I'm just saying like those specific funds, like let's say he gets cleared of any wrongdoing and then he takes that money and buys a museum with it, he'll be right back in court. Like it's never really going to go away, right? Like they could just say like you haven't committed a crime as far as you haven't committed a violation up to this point, but that doesn't mean that like he can never commit it. Like he could just commit it later down the road. So I think he's just never really going to be able to touch that money for his own purposes anyway. The smart thing I think to do would be to decentralize that wealth as much as possible. It takes a target off his back. So I mean that's my take on it. I'd rather see Pulse Chain benefit from it, because like the reality is, guys, like there is nothing written in stone that says like Pulse Chain has to survive and thrive and be like the next best thing in crypto. Like, you see how the landscape has changed. There is a ton of competition out there. Like, it's ridiculous. I'm not saying all the competitors are worthy. I think a lot of the stuff that comes out in crypto is much worse. It's complete shit, right? It should not even really exist. Pulsechain is better, right? But there's nothing set in stone that says the market will decide Pulsechain is a good store of value. There's just nothing that says that. The only thing that shows, like, proves that is capital actually flowing into the chain, you know. And we had a period from March to September where the answer to that question was resoundingly no. It got just absolutely drained out to having less than $100 million on the entire chain. I mean, all of Pulsechain at some point put together was less than MOG on Ethereum or WIF on Solana. Like, you had single coins on these other chains that essentially represent more capital than all of Pulsechain put together. At some point, you kind of have to get the writing on the wall. It's like, shit, well, like, you know, maybe this isn't happening, right? And the problem is, like, this is not just my opinion. Like, this comes from like people I've spoken to. Also, it is my opinion. But if you have like essentially like $1 billion, you know, and Richard has some ability to influence where it gets allocated to, and that none of that money flows to Pulsechain, well, you're asking someone else to go and put up capital for it instead. And so if like the guy who like, you know, already has like $1 billion that was not his ever to begin with and is not willing to even store it on Pulse, I'm not saying even buy Pulse or Hex or anything, I'm just saying like store it on Pulsechain. Well, why would someone else come in with their own $10 million and do that for him? Like, they're not going to. I told you guys in like back in September when we were at lows and breaking all-time lows or setting new all-time lows, that if you wanted to put $10 million onto Pulsechain into Pulse, like the most liquid asset at the time, you would be losing $4 million to do that. Like, so if you made a market order for $10 million, right, and you would immediately be at a loss of $4 million. This is what happens. This is why a lot of chains don't make it, is because once you get to a like low enough capital on the chain, it becomes exponentially more difficult to justify bringing in big numbers. And Pulsechain doesn't need 1 million or 5 million. It needs 100 million. So if you're asking someone other than, you know, Richard essentially to bring in $10 million onto the chain, why would they want to lose $4 million? And that's how we had that spiral down to, like, you know, from March to September, you know. And we're at a point now where we're still kind of like teetering. It's much better. I love to see the price go to, and I told you guys it was going to go to 406. Like, I think we stopped just short. I think it was like 4058, 59, something in that area. And the reason is because if you look at, since the sell-off, like the point of control, if you take everyone who participated, that is the average position, like average entry price, or average, like whatever, you know,
Oh, yeah.
their cost average. Yeah, sorry, I like totally had a brain fart. And so you saw it go right to like 406 and, you know, kind of try to hold there and stuff. But if you've been down, like, so if everybody's position is an average 406 since March, you know, almost everyone is, and they saw their average 406 and they see the price go down to like 4031, right? 4032. So basically on average, everybody was down 50% on their account. So of course, the first time they get anywhere near break even, they're going to sell. And that's what you saw happen. Now, like, you know, I'm not going to go into the whole thing. I've been talking a lot anyway, but that's kind of where we're at. So we're teetering. I think we have signs of life. Like, we're in a much better position than we were, you know, like 60 days ago. But still, like, even today, like, guys, why did EHEX go up so much? Well, did you know that $1 million, $1 million into EHEX 5x the price in September? Like, I don't know if a lot of people know that. Like, that's how low liquidity we got to a certain point. So, you know, the money's got to flow from somewhere. But essentially, if the SAC funds are not are not being used to capitalize the chain, it's very difficult for anybody else with serious money, like 10 million plus, to be even able to justify taking the haircut to, even if they believe in Pulsechain. They might love Pulsechain, they might love Richard, but how do you justify losing $4 million? Like, you just can't do it, right? So either we're gonna have like a very slow and like steady come up, right? Somebody bring in $10 million, people bring in 200 grand, 100 grand here and there, and over time it'll become easier to like to inject for big money to come in and be a little bit safer in doing so. But the main valid here, I'll shut up on this one, right? So the number one thing that I was looking at, like the way I was able to kind of call I didn't call the absolute bottom, but like I basically marked like September 4th to the 8th. That's when you wanted to be in. If you were going to be in, don't DCA, don't do any of the stupid shit. Like, that's where you want to be in. So let's check in like that first week, towards the end of the first week of November. You might get another shot at this. And I'm telling you guys, if things go in the positive direction from that date to the end of the year, you will not have another like golden opportunity like you're going to get coming up here very shortly. So, you don't like, you can chill, like catch up on sleep. You don't need to do any of the shit where you're staying up all night. Like, chill, sleep, rest, be good to yourself, take care of all your other real life stuff. You're going to grind that first week of November. And honestly, guys, if things go in a positive way, you are not going to have to do shit except get rich until January. Like, that's what's at stake here. We could finally have fun spaces again. So right now we are at 54 million pulse per ETH. Which is still good. That's why I keep telling you guys, like, if things are going to go well, you want to be in somewhere under that 44 million pulse per ETH mark. Like, that's going to be a safe valuation to be in at. If you get it lower, like, I think right now, if there is a bit more of a dip, like if there's a dip, it's just because like the markets are volatile right now, and maybe there'll be a little bit of disappointment with the case. But if you can get PLS anywhere like under, let's say like 60 million or something like that, 60 million pulse per ETH, which is like it maybe like 10% down from here, down to like 75 million, right? I don't think it goes back down to 75 million, to tell you the truth. I think it'll stop around like like mid 60s if it does continue to go down. But that's what you want to look for, right? Like, if you're in, get in below that 44 million pulse per ETH valuation. If you're more of like really opportunity seeking, or you have a lot of extra capital sidelined and stuff, like, you are going to be very safe with the play anywhere in the 60s. If you get it to 70, like, that's phenomenal. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at, because look, now we got to 40, and I told you that was the minimal valuation of PLS against ETH. Now the top of that is actually like 18 million pulse per ETH. And so the higher it goes, like, these gains they're logarithmic, right? So the amount you went up from 75 to 44 is actually a lot less than what you would get if it goes from 44 to 18 or 20, or whatever the next part is. So that's why, like, even if you feel like maybe I missed like some of this breakout, or I wish I got more of that, you weren't all in, like, you could still get a lot of gains. Like, there's still a lot of meat left on the bone. That's all I want to say. And obviously when PLS does good, all the other does good too. It's all priced in PLS.